Hello, and it's so good that you could join us again for another Total Transformation seminar. Tonight's seminar is number 5 in the series of 10, and I'm sure you'll find just as packed with solid information and words of wisdom to live by. I'd like to remind you that if during the presentations there are any questions, please place these questions on the chat. So we just want you to sit back and enjoy the menu served up by our 3 presenters this evening. Juliet has the task of introducing our first speaker. So Juliet, over to you.
Thank you, Leroy. This evening, I would like to welcome Dr. Sham. He's been with us the past 2 evenings. Amazing presentation. The first was Matters of the Heart. We learned how fragile the heart is and how to look after it, paying particular attention to the blood vessels. His second presentation was sleep, the rest everyone needs but commonly neglects. We learned how sleep deprivation reduces life expectancy. And we learned also that if we sleep, keeping our sleep at the forefront of our health, then it leads to a healthy mind and a healthy body. Tonight, Dr. Sham will be presenting another topic for us, and that topic is diabetes, not really a sweet disease. Diabetes is a global problem and has major impacts on individual health and also that on the family. During the presentation, if you have any questions, then please place them in the chat. The next voice that you'll hear this evening is that of Dr. Sham.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you again for joining and for this opportunity. And today we're going to be looking at diabetes. The most important thing for you to know, for all of us to know, is diabetes is not caused by eating sugar. But if you're a diabetic, you cannot eat sugar or carbohydrates. Sometimes we love our food so much and we say, my stomach is mine and what goes in my plate is my choice. But my health is my doctor's responsibility. In modern medicine, if you look at the modern medicine, how it is practiced now, we, unfortunately, are busy treating the complications and not treating the cause or preventing the disease. We're busy treating the complications. It is like busy cleaning up and mopping up the floor, but not closing the tap and letting the sink overflow. That's how modern medicine is practiced. For those of you who suffer with type 2 diabetes, or if you have family or friends who have type 2 diabetes, please watch carefully and understand that type 2 diabetes can be cured. I repeat, type 2 diabetes can be cured. What is diabetes? To understand what is diabetes, I would like you all to imagine a road and there is a flash flood and all the drains that drain the road are blocked. So there is water overload on the road. So just imagine in place of the water, there is sugar. Normally when we eat food, the food is absorbed, and if we have too much of carbohydrates, there is a lot of sugar in the blood. The body normally uses the sugar and it enters the cells. Every cell it enters, and the rest of the glucose that is not used is converted to glycogen into the liver and muscle. So when somebody has diabetes, that means sugar is there in the blood, but it is not getting drained into the body cells. And that's why the sugar remains in the blood and it is a metabolic disease. The body is not able to manage the sugars after a meal. That's what basically diabetes is. You're eating sugar or eating any food or carbohydrates and the body is not able to manage it. We need to look at what insulin is. Insulin is a chemical or hormone produced in an organ called pancreas from beta cells, and they produce the insulin. Let us look at how insulin manages the sugars in a minute. But there are two types of diabetes. I'm sure all of you know that there's type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes. I'm not going to tell you that, you already know. The body cannot produce insulin in the type 1. So they would have had either a viral illness or an autoimmune disease, and the cause is unknown. About 20% of the diabetics are type 1. Type 2, there is insulin, but the body is resistant to it. The body is not able to use the insulin, and about 80% of the diabetics are type 2. Let's look at the epidemiology, how common it is. According to the 2018 census, there are 66 million in the UK, and out of which 5 million are diabetic. So that is 1 in 15 have a diabetes. But a majority of them are not yet diagnosed. So it's always late by the time a person is diagnosed with diabetes. And in the last 20 years, the number of people with diabetes has more than doubled. What are some of the risk factors for diabetes? The risk factors are stress, family history, and poor lifestyle. I'm going to be talking a bit more about lifestyle. Poor lifestyle, lack of activity, and improper diet, and all these things are the risk factors. Symptoms. What are symptoms? The symptoms are mainly tiredness and going to the toilet very often, feeling thirsty a lot, and eating a lot despite having a lot of sugar in the blood. So the body is not able to use the sugar, and therefore they want to eat. And there is abnormal loss of weight. It is there in the sugar is there in the blood, and it gets spilled into the urine, and sugars are lost in the urine, and therefore there is not enough sugar or the calories in the body for the body to use. There is some genes which are affecting diabetes. So if your father or mother have been a diabetic, there is chance that you can be a diabetic. Now, if one of your parents is a diabetic, there is 20% chance that you can be a diabetic if they're type 2. If both are diabetics, there is 30% chance that you can be a diabetic. The genes affect only about 10%. And if you have a proper lifestyle with exercise and the way you eat and not being a couch potato, then you can delay the onset for up to 10 years, even if you have the bad genes. Now, there is something new called epigenetics. So epigenetics are the parts of the gene which regulate in the genes whether either they are suppressed or expressed. So if I have a gene and there are parts of the gene which are epigenetics, and if my bad lifestyle is there, then they're going to express the gene and I'll get the disease. So if the gene is suppressed, then diabetes will not occur. But if it is expressed, the diabetes will occur. There are a lot of environmental or lifestyle factors, and the combination of lifestyle factors and genes which will determine whether you'll get diabetes or not. Listen to this. Somebody said, having bad genes is like having a loaded gun with you, but your lifestyle triggers it. So all of us can have bad genes, but if your lifestyle is not good, you're triggering a loaded gun by getting all these diseases. Let's go back to how insulin works. Insulin is like a lock which opens the door of the cell and allows the glucose to enter. So if the lock is not there, the glucose will not be able to enter into the cell, and the cell will not be able to use the glucose. In a normal person, that's what happens. But in type 1 diabetes, there is no insulin at all, and therefore the cells are not, the lock is not open with the insulin, then therefore the glucose is not entering the cell. Type 2, insulin is there, but the key does not work. Glucose still stays outside in the blood. It doesn't enter the cell for the cell to use it. So what happens to this key when there is a type 2 diabetes? There is something jammed in the keyhole, and it is blocked by the fat that we have in our body. So the fat that we have in our body jams the keyhole for the insulin to open so that the glucose can enter. That doesn't happen here. So what is the mechanism of diabetic complications? So these are some of the reasons for that complications. There is hyperglycemia. There's a lot of sugar in the blood. Because there's a lot of sugar in the blood, but the body is not able to use it, the body continues to produce more insulin, so called hyperinsulinemia. And with a lot of complex process, there is inflammation in the body. There is general inflammation in the body. So there is sugars are high, insulin is high. What is the significance? The sugar is there in the blood, but the cells are not able to use it, and they're hungry, and that's why the body produces more insulin. And when there is no insulin, the body breaks down the glycogen and uses it, and glucose is very high in the blood, but cells are not able to use it. Then the body looks at the other sources, such as fat, and it breaks down the fat. When sugar is not available, it looks at the fat and it breaks down the fat, and the fat is in the circulation, and it causes complications like fatty liver and atherosclerosis that we talked about, the blocking of the blood vessels. And similar thing happens in the other organs as well. So hence the function is less due to less blood, and it functions at less capacity or stops functioning. So when there is less blood going into any organ, the function is less, and ultimately it will stop functioning. That's what happens to the kidneys. So how does insulin resistance happen? So if we have lipid overload or fat overload, if you are eating too much of refined carbohydrates with very less fiber, and if we have very insufficient movement, no activity, no exercise, then there is resistance, insulin resistance. Insulin is there, but it does not work. So abdominal fat or having obesity, lack of exercise, lack of sleep. Remember we talked yesterday, excess carbohydrates, and genetic susceptibility and chronic illness and inflammation. These are all the causes for insulin resistance. So hyperinsulinemia, what does too much of insulin does to the body? It causes diabetes, it causes cancer, it causes a lot of inflammation and autoimmune diseases, hypertension, and again, atherosclerosis. Before sugar goes high, there is many years of hyperinsulinemia. So somebody is getting diagnosed with diabetes, but before the diagnosis, people have been having hyperinsulinemia, having a lot of insulin in the blood for many years. And sometimes it can be as long as 9 to 12 years before somebody can be diagnosed with diabetes. The medical science does not check insulin levels regularly. It only checks your sugars. But you can have a normal sugars, but it can have very high insulin levels if you were to check. Now let's look at a bit about inflammation. Inflammation is a process in our body. So there are a lot of protection. Our body has a lot of protection, like skin and some certain cells in our body, they protect us. So they're like a guard dog, which protect us from anything entering from outside. But when we have immunodeficiency, when our immunity is not good, the dog is inactive. It's not protecting us anymore because of our lifestyle choices. And there is something called autoimmune disease, which is basically the guard dog, which is supposed to protect us, is attacking us. So the dog does not recognize me and it attacks me. That's what autoimmune disease is. So the body does not identify its own tissues and it attacks the own tissues. So these are all some of the causes for inflammation. All of you would know arthritis, the old age arthritis. In the past, we always used to say, oh, your joints have worn out because of the old age, wear and tear and all that. But there is a lot of inflammation in the joints, which causes the joints to wear. Please join me on Monday to learn more about bones and joints. So there is low level of protection that destroys and degenerates the organs, even such as the joints. And it's a very complex mechanism of low level of autoimmunity. So inflammation, diabetes, and atherosclerosis, these are all connected, and one feeds the other and vice versa. So if there is a lot of inflammation, there's diabetes, and if there's diabetes, that causes a lot of inflammation in the body. And when there's diabetes, there is atherosclerosis or the blocking of the blood vessels, and cycle goes on. So how do you diagnose diabetes? So diagnosis diabetes is classically diagnosed with blood test, which is done when you're fasting. So when you're fasting, the blood sugar has to be at a certain level, but after you eat something, it goes up, but it has to be at a certain level. So if the body is able to manage the glucose load that you give when you have breakfast, the body should be able to manage the glucose that you put into your body. Otherwise, it's diabetes. Okay. What are some of the complications? The main thing about diabetes is complications. Diabetes can affect many, many, many organs. So we can look at the complications as acute complications or chronic complications. Acute complications, one of them is hypoglycemia. When somebody who's on medication or insulin, they continue to take the medicine, but they don't eat well, then they have severe weakness, palpitations, sweaty, shaky, and they often go into coma as well. Hyperglycemia means a lot of sugar in the blood. So it's not controlled. It's a very poorly controlled, and they can have so many symptoms like feeling thirsty, feeling hungry all the time, and dizzy, and all the other things. And there are, of course, diabetic ketoacidosis, which is a dangerous complication, and it can often lead to coma. Chronic complications, somebody who's been diabetic for some time and is poorly controlled, they can have complications affecting many parts of the body, like the eyes, kidneys, nerve, like the neuropathy, your hands and legs, and brain and heart. You name an organ, and it can affect. The diabetes can affect. So when you talk about the complications, we talk about microvascular complications and macrovascular complications. So the small blood vessels which supply the nerves, small blood vessels which supply the blood vessels, the eyes and the kidneys, all these get affected. The big blood vessels which supply the lungs and kidneys and brain and heart, they're all affected. So it affects lots of organs in the body. There was a study done when they picked up some medical students and done a study in them. They've given a lot of carbohydrate food for a couple of weeks, and they checked the sugars, and they could manage the sugars very well. But then later on, for another week, they've given a lot of fatty food for these medical students, and they checked the sugars, and the sugars levels went up very high. So it's not the sugars which cause the sugar to go high, but it's the fatty food that takes it. There was another study done where people were given 4 different foods. One is oatmeal, second one pasta, fish, and hamburger. So you might think oatmeal is carbohydrates, pasta is also full of carbohydrates, you might think, but then those people who ate oatmeal and pasta, their sugars were very much under control. But those who ate fish and hamburger, their sugars went up very, very high. So remember, the key is the insulin, which opens the cell door to let the sugar go in. Now, please concentrate on some of this 8 steps that I'm going to tell you about reversing diabetes. Reversing diabetes. Number 1, walk 4 miles a day, or at least an hour a day, and it unclogs the insulin receptors. When you walk, it unclogs the insulin receptors. Number 2, avoid all animal products. Avoid all animal products. Number 3, drink alkaline water. 4, 8 servings of dark green. You have to eat dark green vegetables like broccoli and beans and things like that. 8 servings or 4 cups of dark green. You don't have to eat them raw. Number 5, 8 servings of fully cooked beans. And people do say beans have got a lot of carbohydrates, but beans are very good. And it's also proved to be a factor in the long life expectancy. And please join me again on Tuesday for lessons to learn from the people who live the longest. That's number 5. 6, when you eat, the carbohydrate and fiber ratio should not be more than 5 to 1. So if you have 50 grams of carbohydrate, your fiber has to be at least 10 grams. 50 grams of carbohydrate, 10 grams of fiber. So when you look at pasta and packets like that, you can see how much sugar is there, how much carbohydrate is there, and how much fiber is there. So not enough fiber is a big problem here, okay? Now, number 7, fat content in the whole food should be less than 10%. So if you eat a lot of ice creams and cakes and things like that, there's a lot of fat in that, and our fat content in the whole food should be less than 10%. Number 8, more important, we spoke yesterday, sleep for at least 7 to 8 hours at night. Sleep for at least 7 to 8 hours at night. There was a study done in the nighttime workers for a 30-year study, 30 years follow-up, and they have found out that the incidence of diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, cancer, and obesity are very common in all these people. So the fact is that when we don't sleep in the night, the cortisol level goes up. The cortisol is another hormone in the body. It goes up, and that causes the blood sugar to go up. So that is the cause. That's the reason for lack of sleep, lack of and obesity, lack of exercise, obesity, and it leading to the diabetes. And if you follow this process, it'll help you lose a lot of weight as well. Now, I have done a seminar about 3 months ago, not a seminar, but a panel discussion, which is on YouTube. The link will be sent for you. It will be shown for you in a bit. So after doing that study, the panel discussion, one of my retired colleague who's 70 years old had bad diabetes for over 10 years, and he followed this religiously, and he called me a month later and said within a month he lost 4 kilos weight. My father-in-law's sugar was not under good control, but once he started following this, his sugar is the best I've ever seen. So if you suffer with diabetes, please try this. I'm sure you will benefit from reversing the diabetes. You can not only control it, but you can reverse the diabetes. I'm putting those 8 steps on the chat. I'm putting those 8 steps on the chat, and I have just put it now. And that is the YouTube clip, how to treat, prevent, and reverse diabetes, a panel discussion. If you put Manchester Southern Asia Church on YouTube, you will find that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sham. I've got 1 or 2 questions just to ask you. You explained really well about reversing diabetes, and I'm sure people will check out the discussion that you described. But I want to know, if somebody has type 2 diabetes, should they be on insulin? Should they take insulin? Some people want to avoid taking insulin because it's a long-term thing. Yes. What's your thought on that?
Normally, type 2 diabetes can be treated with tablets to start with, but if it goes on for a few years with a very poor control, that's when, as a last resort, they're put on insulin. So not everybody who has type 2 diabetes needs to be on insulin. So there are some medication which improves the insulin resistance, and that helps the condition. But if it is very poorly controlled over a period of time, that's when they're put on insulin.
Okay, thank you. Another question, somebody's suffering from blurred vision through the diabetes. Will that lead to blindness?
Yes, it can. Diabetes is one of the leading causes causing for blindness as well. So what happens is that in the eyes, the small blood vessels at the back of the eyes, they're damaged and they bleed, and they cause, that's the reason for causing damage to the eyes. So if you go for an eye test, they can take a picture of the back of the eye and they can show you what it looks like.
Thank you. Another question, sometimes my feet and my hands are cold as a diabetic. What should I do?
Please follow this 8 principles I've given. I'm sure you will see a change within a month. So basically what happens is the blood vessels, the tiny blood vessels which are supplying the nerves are blocked. So the blood supply is not going to the nerves, And that's why you have burning, severe tingling, and severe neuropathic pain. It can be very disabling pain. But please follow this. Try and become a vegetarian. I'm sure it's going to help you. I've already received a lot of positive feedback with this.
Okay, thank you. You're from India, where they produce lots of mangoes, just as they do in the Caribbean. So this person is asking, I'm a diabetic and I love mangoes. Can I still eat them?
Yes, you can still eat them. Like I said, sugar is not the cause for diabetes, but then as long as you have enough of fiber with your food, you can still have fruits, mangoes, and I love mangoes.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, Dr. Sham, for your presentation. As Dr. Sham has said, it's been placed in the chat. You can follow him on YouTube and try to understand a little bit clearer and more in depth about diabetes and reversing diabetes. Thank you once again for your presentation.
Thank you, pleasure.
You're welcome. Thank you. I'm now going to hand you over to Lesmond.
Thank you for unmuting me. Appreciate that. Thank you. I was saying Dr. Sham and Juliet, really insightful and very, very helpful if we follow those principles outlined. Dr. Parks, it's good to have you with us once again. We're back on the mental health section of today. I believe in my absence, you had a fantastic time yesterday. So let's hope it's equally as good today. Okay, I believe tonight we're looking at self-control. Yesterday we touched on a couple of things in relation to depression and how we can manage and methods to manage and treat depression. I believe some of those things were looking at counseling and antidepressants, but the route that you described was taking a more natural route, looking at things like the food that we eat, the lifestyle changes, nutrition, diet, health, TLC, is that correct?
TLC, therapeutic lifestyle changes.
There you go, therapeutic lifestyle changes. Excellent, thank you. Okay, so tonight we're going to look at self-control. I'm going to hand over to you, Dr. Parks. Thank you.
All right, we're starting a little early today. That's good. I'm glad to be with you all again, and thank you for that summary that you gave of what we talked about last night. You know, my people who are watching and listening, this topic is important because a lot of the diseases that we are talking about, the previous doctor, I can't remember his name, talked about diabetes. Sometimes these issues, these chronic diseases are due to poor lifestyle habits. And the bottom line for some people might be they lack self-control. They don't know how to curb and discipline themselves to be able to exercise properly and eat the right foods and go walking as they should. So we're going to talk about self-control today. You know, in our world that we live in, the theme is, if you want it, get it. Resisting unhealthy desires, resisting unhealthy emotions, habits, they're not encouraged in our world today. It's kind of like, I want it, I get it. So the idea of self-control for many people is kind of foreign. Sometimes we desire it, but most of us are not successful at it for a long time. So let's look at this area and see what we can find out. Actually, the Bible talks a lot about self-control, but this is not a biblical talk. However, I just want to mention one that looks at the issue of self-control, where we're told by the wise King Solomon, he says, "He that hath no rule over his own spirit is like a city that is broken down without walls." So this is referring to self-control of emotions. If you don't have control over your emotions, you're like a city without walls. And if you know anything about the cities of the old time, ancient times, oftentimes they had fortresses around them to protect them from the enemy. And so self-control is like a fortress for us to prevent us from having issues, having addictions, having lifestyle diseases. And if we don't have the self-control, we're like a city that's broken down without walls. So we want to look at some of these areas. There was a psychologist, actually, before I talk about the psychologist, there was a study actually done in the US. I hope you don't mind me referring to a US study, even though I'm talking to people living in the UK. They studied the favorite temptations of people. They did a random sample, and they studied the quote unquote famous temptations of people. And I don't think it's going to be much different between the US and the UK. Let me just share some of what they found that people said. Well, there was a lot of temptations, gossiping, overspending, feeling jealous, overeating. These were some of the things. But what I really wanted to focus on is the fact that they asked people, well, how do you deal with these issues when they come about? 18% of people said they prayed. 12% of them said they used reason and they used reminders. 10% say, I just stay away from it, whatever it may be. And 10% said, I just say no. I don't know if you remember in the United States, some of you may be old enough to remember Nancy Reagan, the wife of Ronald Reagan, and she started that whole campaign for young people staying away from drugs. Just say no. Was it successful? Not too much, but some people, that's what they use. Some people call people when they're facing things that they know they shouldn't do. I do that with my clients. Sometimes I encourage them to get an accountability partner. I'm going to talk a little bit briefly about that later. Some use willpower, some people sleep on it, and some people just go to bed. So these are different ways that people decide they want to deal with their issues, the things that come to them that they're tempted with. There was a famous study done, and many of you may know of this study. It was done with children. I think they were in preschool, by Dr. Walter Mischel. And in that study, he presented, it's called the marshmallow study. And in that study, he had the children come into the room and they were a marshmallow in front of them. And he said to them, if you will just wait 15 minutes and not eat this marshmallow, you will get another marshmallow. The children who waited and did not eat it, later research showed that they were less likely to abuse drugs. They had better relationships. They were better at handling stress. They obtained higher degrees and they earned more money, and they were better psychologically adjusted. The children who ate that marshmallow before the 15 minutes, they did worse in life. So that shows you how important it is to teach children from a young age to exercise self-control. I love this psychology, Dr. Roy Baumeister, and he says that when psychologists isolate the personal qualities that predict positive outcomes in life, they consistently find two traits. Let me repeat that again. When psychologists isolate the personal qualities that predict positive outcomes in life, they consistently find two traits: intelligence and self-control. And they said that these two traits are what causes people to be the most successful in life. And of the two traits, which do you think is the most important? I can't get answers from you, but some of you are probably guessing by the fact that I'm talking about it: self-control. That is the most important outcome based on research by psychologists that determine how successful a person is going to be in life. Have you ever met someone who's very, very intelligent as you get to know them, and you say to yourself, wow, I wonder why they didn't do well in life, or I wonder why they didn't go further in life? And I'm not necessarily talking about college or degrees. I'm just saying, being able to have a successful business or a successful trade. You meet people like that and you just wonder what happened. I would dare to say many of these people have not learned to exercise self-control. They may be very intelligent, but they don't know how to exercise self-control. They're not self-disciplined. So self-control is very important. Baumeister also says, we have this push about self-esteem. I have this problem because I have low self-esteem and I don't feel good about myself. But Baumeister says, you know what? Instead of focusing so much on self-esteem, we need to be focusing on self-control. self-control. The research actually shows that people have more problems because they lack self-control than they have poor self-esteem. And that's a whole nother topic in itself, because interestingly, the research does not show self-esteem to be as problematic, let me change that around, to be as much of a cause as of problems that we have as we tend to think. Actually, bullies have high self-esteem. They found some criminals have high self-esteem. So self-esteem is not cracked up to what we think it is based on the research, but self-control does. So when parents are working with children, they should really model and then teach their children self-control. They did a study with some other people over years, 20 years, and they found that those who had self-control had less personal finance issue, better physical health. And you could hear that based on some of the talks on the health with diabetes and all of that. The substance dependence were less dependent on substances like nicotine and alcohol, etc. And they were less likely to have criminal offenses. So self-esteem, I hope you're picking up, self-esteem is very important. I want to look at some specific areas when it comes to self-esteem. One of the areas is food. Many of us have problems saying no when it comes to food. And some of us even have what's known as emotional eating. We don't know how to deal with our emotions, and so we tend to eat. And oftentimes people who have problems with emotional eating, here are some specific characteristics that they tend to have. They can't tell the difference between hunger and appetite. There's a difference. There's a difference between feeling hungry and having an appetite, all right? They don't know, they let their mood push them towards their food. They let their mood push them towards their food. So if I'm feeling bored, if I'm feeling stressed, if I'm feeling angry, people who are emotional eaters, they allow those moods to push them through to eating. At the supermarket, they tend to buy things that sabotage them, whether that be, you all call them crisps there. In the United States, we call them chips, but overbuying crisps or overbuying soft drinks or whatever the case may be. And people with emotional eating problems, they also don't pay attention to when they hit the full mark. They ignore it. And then they don't get enough sleep. So these are just some characteristics of people with emotional eating problems. And I meet these people all the time. And so learning to gauge and learn other ways to deal with your mood, listening to your body when it's saying you're full, not going to the supermarket and buying things to fulfill these emotional needs can really help. I heard this nutritionist, I went to a workshop, and this nutritionist said this. She says, don't stuff your face, face your stuff. It sounds real simple, but I thought it was powerful. People who are emotional eaters, sometimes they don't want to face their stuff. They don't want to face the pain. They don't want to face the loneliness. They don't want to face the stress. So they stuff their face. So a tip would be, the next time you start to eat something, especially if it's not during your mealtime, or you've already had your mealtime and you've eaten, you've consumed what you need to consume, and you're getting ready to go into that cabinet or that refrigerator, ask yourself, am I stuffing my face or am I facing my stuff? And there's much more that can be said about appetite, but I'll just leave it there. Another area where people have problems with self-control is actually in the area of sexual appetite and passions. Now, I sadly run across this with people. More and more people, even within our Christian church, are getting into this particular area, and that is pornography. And pornography is an area that people show that they do not have self-control. Sadly, it's increasing because we have social media outlets, places where people can gain easy access to it. And it used to be an issue that was just with women. Now we're finding men. I'm sorry, just the opposite. It used to be an issue just more with men. Now we're finding women engaging more and more in pornography. And one person says pornography provides an experience of sexual stimulation and release without connecting to another human being. It's always taking rather than giving. Each experience viewing pornography lessens your ability to connect with a real live person. So this issue of not being able to control what we watch and then engaging, I believe most of us on here are adults. So I can say this, pornography is most of the time connected with masturbation. And it's a secret vice that people can do and come out and just look like they're just on top of the world. But that's the thing that keeps it going. It's a very secret thing. And I have found that some of these lifestyle changes that we are talking about, the different ones of us who are presenting, sometimes they can be helpful, even with controlling pornography, watching how much spice we put in our food, believe it or not, because you want to eat foods that will keep you as less stimulated as possible. Getting to bed at a good time. A lot of people who engage in pornography go to bed at ungodly hours. Getting exercise, finding substitute behaviors. I can't give you all that can be done with pornography in this presentation, but I had to mention it because that's a real area where people are lacking self-control. And not only with that, it destroys us and it takes away our character. So if you're having issues with this, I encourage you to talk to someone, not necessarily a counselor. If you're religious, you can talk to someone who is a spiritual leader as well. Another thing that we have problems controlling, and that's many of us, is our words. Sometimes we think it noteworthy. I tell people just what I feel. That's just who I am. You ever met people like that? That person actually has a problem with self-control. They have a problem controlling their tongue. They pride themselves on that, but it's actually an issue. We need to know when to put a guard on our lips, when to put a watch before our mouth, as the psalmist David says. We need to be careful about being always outspoken, and we need to learn that that's an issue that we have to control. Sometimes we hurt people with our words, and we have to work on restraining what we say and how we say it. The wise man Solomon, again, I just love his Proverbs. He says this, and it's so powerful to me. A fool uttereth all his mind, but a wise man keepeth it in till afterwards, in Proverbs 29:11. So those who think we can just speak our mind whenever we want, actually, the King Solomon describes that person as a fool. So we want to learn not to be fools by uttering everything in our mind, and learn to keep a tab on how we are just hurting people with our tongues. And that's an area of self-control. Another area is thoughts. We need to learn how to control what we think. You've heard me mention thinking several times in these presentations because it's such a central part of our mental health. And learning how to control what we think, it's possible to do that. Some of us just allow our minds and our thoughts to just go wherever it wants, but we need to rein in our thoughts. We need to not allow ourselves to continually think negative things about ourselves, to think negative things about others, to worry. All of these can be areas where we lack self-control. It takes work, but it's possible for us to be able to control our thoughts. And then we also need to control our emotions. I mentioned that a proverb about being slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that ruleth his spirit. Well, I did mention that verse, actually. I was mentioning another one about it, but this one says, he that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that ruleth his spirit better than he that taketh a city. I had a quote where an emperor said, of all the things that he conquered, his greatest conquest, and I'm kind of paraphrasing it, his greatest conquest was his ability to control his temper. This person had had conquest of cities, countries, etc., but he said, my greatest conquest was being able to control my temper. So I want to encourage you to look at how you can control your emotions. So we talked briefly, and we're just kind of skimming the surface with these areas. We talked about controlling our appetite, our eating appetite, and also our sexual appetite. We talked about controlling words. We talked about controlling thoughts, controlling emotions. There are probably other areas, but these are the areas that I find come up in our lives regularly. And so you want to start to pay attention to these areas and see what you can do to be able to control them. And I just want to share some tips with you about controlling these things based on research. One of the things that psychologists has found to help with self-control is to develop a broad, long-range focus instead of a here and now focus. What does that mean? Don't just live in the here and now. Don't just live in a way that says, I'm hungry, or I want this food, I'm going to eat it right now. Think of the long-range focus. The long-range focus may be, I need to do better so I can control my diabetes. I need to do better so I can lose weight. I need to do better so I won't be an emotional eater. I don't want to just focus on what I'm feeling and wanting right now. I need to focus on that long-range goal. Keep that in mind. Just don't live for the here and now, because when we just live for the here and now, in terms of self-control, it can be problematic. Another tip that psychologists have found is helpful is to develop what's known as a self-forgetful attitude. Sometimes we're just so focused on ourselves. We're so focused on, I want this, or I desire this, or I'm not getting this, or I want to gratify this. Start to live with a more self-forgetful attitude. These are not things, let me tell you, these are not things that will happen quickly, but if you start to make conscious efforts and say, I'm going to make a commitment to do something so I can have self-control, such as having a self-forgetful attitude, having a long-range goal in mind, you will find that you will have success in developing or in exhibiting self-control. Another tip that's found is to make resolutions in front of another person. The research shows that when we make a resolution in front of someone, that's kind of what I've talked about earlier. That person can kind of be an accountability partner. And when you say in front of them, it could be by phone, it could be over the internet, but just having someone where you say, you know what, I'm making a resolution that I'm going to be careful with what I say to people. I'm going to be more self-controlling with my words. Or I'm making a resolution that I'm going to watch what I eat and not eat when I'm emotional. So these are found to be helpful. When you make resolutions in front of people, it's kind of like when you're tempted to do something, not only do you remember yourself, but you remember the person. And so that accountability can help you. All right. Another tip, take one step at a time. If you're dealing with an issue of self-control, take one step at a time. It may be that you need to cut down on sugar. You may decide, okay, today, instead of eating a candy bar and having something else with sugar, I'm just going to work on cutting out the candy bar. You may do that for a few days. Then you add, okay, I'm going to add this to my list. So take one step at a time, because sometimes if you try to do everything at one time, if you try to overcome your issue in a week or in a day, it can be overwhelming. So you want to take one step at a time so you won't discourage yourself in terms of overcoming self-control or overcoming these issues where you have self-control issues. You also want to, I'm having a little something here. Sorry if you see me swinging my hand, there's a little bug that was flying around. You also want to view willpower as a muscle. Why do I say that? This is the research showing this. In order for a muscle to get strong, you have to do what? You have to exercise it. The more you exercise it, the stronger you get. And with willpower, with self-control, I'm using this synonymously in this example. They're not always the same. If you start to exercise self-control in small areas, the more you exercise that self-control, the stronger you would get in other areas of self-control. So if you have a small problem of, let's say, eating late at night, you eat snacks late at night, you're recognizing it's putting on weight, you're not sleeping well, you can stop eating those snacks, saying, I'm going to exercise self-control here. And as you exercise self-control here, if you have a bigger problem of, let's say, watching pornography, I'm just throwing this out. As you exercise that muscle in one area, it will generalize to a bigger area. Now, I'm not saying everybody who has an issue with pornography, if they just stop eating late at night, it will go away. My point is, find little areas where you can exercise self-control, because that will transfer into bigger areas and make it easier for you to have self-control. All right. So those are just some activities. Well, actually, there was one more thing. The research shows. Now, these were not religious people at all. These were secular researchers. And the research shows that when people become more consistent with religious activities, they actually are better at controlling their selves. Self-control goes up with more consistency with religious activities such as prayer, attending church, reading the Bible. They found that these things can help with self-control. So I hope that this has been helpful for you and that there's some takeaways you can have in terms of knowing how to exercise self-control and recognizing how broad-based it is and how important it is for your success in this life. Thank you for listening.
Wow, thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate that. That was packed full with challenges and advice and some direction. Really appreciate that. Thank you very much. To be honest, I'm looking for some questions in the chat and I don't know where to start. Here we go. So you mentioned about the mind, about speech, eating, taking adequate rest, controlling your thoughts, also your decision making, and managing emotions and appetites, i.e. sex, as well as eating, as we've already mentioned. How do I go about starting to try to control any of those things?
Well, let's look at the area of words. One of the things you can do, I mentioned earlier, is to find an accountability partner. That might be a good place to start, where you say, you know what, I've discovered that I have a problem with my mouth. And so when we're around one another, maybe you can give me some IQs or something where you could say, okay, you're going too far with this. Or when I'm tempted to want to say something I don't want to say, would you mind me sending you a text or calling you? That just came to my mind quickly. The other thing is to, with appetite, that can also be helpful. Finding that's especially helpful with an accountability partner. When you find yourself wanting to overeat, or to eat something you shouldn't, have someone set up that you can call or text and say, please be there for me so I can text you and you could distract me from doing that. If you are a person who is a Christian, I would like to suggest that one of the places you can start is to pray and say, Lord, I recognize this is an area that I need help. So I'm coming to you to ask you to give me the strength and to help me to be aware of when I'm going to show a lack of self-control in a particular area. The other thing, I'm going to sound like a broken record with these is actually, maybe not, because I've never mentioned this, but I think the doctor before me had mentioned getting to sleep on time can do a lot of things with helping with self-control. Sometimes not getting proper sleep makes us more likely to speak when we shouldn't, eat what we shouldn't, engage in behaviors we shouldn't. So getting proper sleep can be a place to start. Getting exercise can also be a place to start too. And then if you find that you need extra help, seeing a counselor or speaking to a godly person who can give you some tips about how to deal with some of these areas. So that's what comes to my mind in terms of where places to begin. It's not easy, but it is possible.
Thank you. This kind of touches on something that you mentioned. I'm a chocoholic and my wife won't let me get to the chocolates. What should I do?
Thank your wife. Hug her for not getting to that. Wow, you really want to start sitting. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
I'm saying that kind of touches a nerve with me, actually.
You know, it's funny, but it's not. Do you know that chocolate actually has addictive properties to it, like caffeine? And so you need to treat this like an addiction if you really are a chocoholic. And the best way to deal with addiction is total abstinence and allow yourself to go through the pain. You will experience pain and maybe even withdrawal to stop something like chocolate. But you have to make the decision that I'm going to go through this because I know that not only is this not good for me, but you are allowing something to have power over you. You're giving yourself over as a servant or a slave to a substance. And that takes away from empowering your life. So thinking about all of that, making a decision that I'm not going to allow anything to control me and that I don't want to have this addiction, and dealing with it as an addiction will be helpful. It's not going to be easy, but bless your wife for doing that.
I think you really touched on the next question. The next question is about I'm a coffee drinker, and I can't stop, and I'm getting palpitations. How do I begin to stop drinking so much?
I would suggest, I don't know how much the person is drinking, but make a decision to cut down on 1 cup of coffee per whatever time you could do it, every 3 days. And what you could actually start to do is to dilute your cups of coffee with water. And as you reduce them, you'll become more and more weaned off of the caffeine. So you can decrease it by 1 cup, or you could take that 1 cup, half cup coffee, half water. Do that for several days until you get used to that. Then you can do a 2nd cup, half cup water, half cup coffee, until you get to the point where you're off of it. Another thing that can be helpful is, I just blanked on it. What is it? Hot and cold showers. I've heard that's helpful, believe it or not. 3 minutes hot, 30 seconds cold. Doing that 3 times when you're in the shower, 3 minutes hot, 30 seconds cold, it can increase those neurotransmitters, which in turn will give you more strength to make that decision. And those 2 things might be helpful. Diluting your coffee and then doing the hot and cold showers. Those are things. And if you are a smoker, whoever asked this question, those 2 habits tend to go together. And so you want to really work on the smoking as well, because they tend to be coupled together. So that's what comes to my mind immediately.
Thank you. Final question. Where's it gone? How do I create habits in order to exercise self-control? What are the key habits to create?
How do you create? If you remember, I don't know which day I talked about the part of the brain called the caudate nucleus, that it watches you do things for a certain period of time. And after a time that becomes reflexive because it's watched you and it says, okay, this is a habit. So come on, guys, whatever parts of the brain that's needed, let's help her so she doesn't have to think about this as much. I've heard mixed research on this, but they say it takes about 21 days to build a habit. And some people have attested to that being true. I would suggest that you take 1 habit and work on it for 3 weeks, whatever that might be. Say, I want to develop this habit. I want my brain to start to recognize this as a habit. And for the next 3 weeks, I'm going to do this. Make a decision in your mind, make that commitment and start doing it. And if you fall one of those days, that's okay. Don't chastise yourself, because chastising yourself will bring you right back to where you started. Just say, you know what, I fell this day, but I'm going to get up, brush my knees and keep going. Those 2 things come to my mind. Well, one, actually just trying to determine for 21 days, I'm going to work on this habit. And then another 21 days, the next habit. Don't overwhelm yourself. Just take 1 step at a time and you'll hopefully find some success in overcoming these things.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that advice. Really appreciate all you've said tonight. For anybody who's watching or listening, and if you want to recap some of that, you can go to either website, the website totaltransformation.co.uk. Alternatively, you can go to our website, to our YouTube channel, which is Manchester North Seventh-day Adventist Church. All of the videos for this week are all up there, so you can catch each and every one of them. Thank you for listening. I'm now going to hand over to our final section and to Ravonia. Thank you, Dr. Parks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lesmond, and good evening, everyone. And thank you once again for joining us. Our final speaker tonight is Michael Dantzie. Michael is a full-time stay-at-home educator, as he and his wife have homeschooled all 3 of their children since birth. He runs his own business as Dantzie Design and Marketing, as a digital marketing consultant. He has been married for 12 years and has 3 children. He currently lives in Wolverhampton, but is originally from London. He is a committed Seventh-day Adventist Christian and has a passion to share with those who are open to his testimony and why and how he accepted Jesus as his personal savior and sharing the love of Christ. He has been invited as a speaker to Kenya, Jamaica, Philippines, France, Holland, America, and has spoken in many churches in the UK. Before the lockdown, he spent 2 years in Oakwood Prison in Wolverhampton, where he has seen many men's lives change. He has a passion to inspire and aid young people to find their purpose and meaning in life. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Ravonia.
Yeah. So, Michael, tonight's question, viewers, as you know, we've been tackling philosophical questions all week, and our question tonight is in 3 parts. It reads, religion takes away all fun and happiness from this life. What is wrong with pleasure? And the final question is it not natural to incline towards pleasure? Michael, what are your thoughts?
Okay, so before I answer the question directly, I'd like to say that because of time, there's no way to really extrapolate and go into depth with this question or any of the questions. So if anyone wants to reach out to me personally, you can just type in my name on Facebook, private message me, and I could, really go into depth into the question. So I'm going to answer the question in a very kind of broad way. So be understanding to that because of our time constraint. So here is how I would answer the question. First, I'm going to deal with the first part of the question, which is religion takes away all fun and happiness. I would personally agree, and at the same time, I would disagree. Now, why would I agree with that statement? Because depending upon the religion you're talking about and the specific religious practice you're speaking about, there are certain religions that have certain teachings that do condemn what most would deem harmless and innocent fun, harmless practices. So, for example, some people believe that going certain places or listen to certain types of music who are religious or wearing certain types of clothing are deemed evil or sinful. And so I would agree with the statement because it depends who you're asking and which religion you're referring to and what specific religious practice. Now, let me answer the question directly from my perspective. I am as you heard in the introduction, I'm a professed Christian Seventh-day Adventist. And I grew up going to church faithfully with my father every weekend. And there were certain things that were told to us in a general sense that condemned what I saw at the time as very innocent, as harmless. I remember playing some cards. I was up at church, Sabbath had ended. It was nighttime outside, and I was playing some cards with some friends. Now we're having fun, obviously, we're laughing, we're joking, and someone came along and said, "You shouldn't be doing that, right? Put those cards away." Now, the first initial reaction from us was, what? Their reaction was as if to say we were, selling drugs or, we were beating somebody up. We could not equate their reaction with the action that we were doing. So I would agree with that statement because it kind of depends. The second reason for this question, which is usually from younger people in the church, in religions, but from my experience, Christianity, right, is that there's more of an emphasis on what you can't do from what you can do. So let me give an illustration. If I had to do a seminar to encourage people to get married, I want to encourage people to get married. I've been married for 12 years. Imagine me focusing for the whole seminar on all of the nightmares and all of the problems and all of the bad stories and experiences of those who used to be married as my tool to encourage you to get married. That doesn't make sense, right? No one at the end of that seminar is going to sign up and say, you know what? I think I should ask my, my girlfriend to get married right now. So two problems. First problem is that the big elephant in the room when it comes to Christians is that there are ideas we hold about certain recreational activities which fall into the category of extreme and fanatical. That's the first problem. And the second problem is that even those things which are, let's say, harmful to one's, say, lifestyle, and this is not a strange idea, the average parent doesn't want their child to go certain places at certain times. The average parent doesn't want their child to hang around with certain people. The average parent doesn't want their child drinking certain things at a certain age. The average parent has certain standards. So the idea of having a standard that involves condemning certain things is not new, it's not weird, it's not strange. But the problem can be that even with that which is true and good, if I'm only emphasizing the prohibition, if I'm always saying to my children, no, 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 and we never go to the park, we never actually experience other good things, we never actually experience the innocent things, but there's always an emphasis on the negative, it's going to build what I call a culture of resistance, a culture of resistance, where eventually my child will say, you know what, if that is what you call God or religion, I don't want nothing to do with it, because he doesn't want to have any fun or anything of that nature. So that's how I would answer the first part of the question. Second part quickly is the word pleasure. The definition is a feeling of happy satisfaction and enjoyment. Now, I'm going to quote the Bible here because this will resonate with everybody. God is love. Now, when we think of love, we think of enjoyment. We think of a feeling of happy satisfaction, enjoyment. Our wonderful speakers from night to night have been emphasizing on those things that are taken away our love, and have also emphasized our happiness, and have emphasized what can give us back happiness. If you're tired and stressed, do you feel happy? No. So then you want to know, what is taking away my pleasure? Well, maybe it's your lack of sleep. Maybe you're eating too much. Maybe you're depressed. What is your state of mind? Maybe you're working too much. So someone who asked that question about religion takes away pleasure, unfortunately, that's coming from a place where whatever religion they're in, whether that be Christianity, all they see is the prohibition. All they see is what's prohibited. They don't see the other, if there is, an enjoyment side. I'm going to be biased now. I'm a Christian. There is definitely so much good in it, because I accepted when I was 18. I accepted Jesus, my Savior, when I was 18. So I saw the pleasure. What was the pleasure? Man, I'm going to have peace. I'm doing all these things. God loves me. There's somebody who's going to care for me, and I can talk to him to help me in life. So there's also the idea of perspective. When you say pleasure, what are you actually what is it that you wanting to do that this religion that you're in is prohibiting you from? It might be a good thing they're trying to tell you to stay away from, or it might not be. So that's my initial answer.
Okay. All right, Michael. So in light of what you've said, especially in regards to the youths, having an issue with being told with what you can and what you cannot do, right? So a lot of youths will agree that due to the numerous restrictions by parents or their guardians regarding what they can or cannot do when it comes to fun things, results in them being left behind socially and being out of touch with their peers, which can negatively impact with their development. Yes. What's your view? But before you answer that question, I'm just going to add another question to that one, because it's still about the youth, okay? And some young people will argue that restrictions that they may face from their parents as promulgated by religion, bordering on being autocratic, are a violation of their human rights. What do you say about those?
That second one is a bit deep. Let me answer the first one and I'll ask you to repeat the second one. So parenting is a challenge. I'm a parent now, and I'm still a son, because both my parents, thank God, are still alive. So I'm still living both worlds, because no matter how old you get, as a child, your parent always sees you as a child, right? I'm 39 years old, and I've had conflict you know, with my father about certain opinions and things, because he still sees me as the little baby that came out. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm sure I'm going to be the same way. Now, what I would say is, well, let me give what I do with my children. I try to change their perspective, because I know they don't know what I know. They can't know, because what I know is not based upon theory, it's based upon an experience. We've lived longer, we've made our mistakes, and we don't want our children to go down a certain road. So when we're telling them certain things, it's impossible for them to see it. Impossible. So how are we going to help them grasp the information that what I say is invisible? It's just words. How are they going to grasp? Because you're coming from a standpoint of pain. You felt it, you've dealt it, you've been, it's an experience, your discipline, right? Or your advice. So let me give you an example. My children watch, there's certain YouTube channels I allow them to watch, certain YouTube I don't allow them to watch. We put filters and blocks and things, so certain things don't come up that we don't want them to see. But even the good thing that they're watching, they want to watch it all day. Have you noticed about children? When my children were toddlers, we serve them fruit juice. There's nothing wrong with fruit juice. It gives them all, you know, pleasure, right? There's nothing wrong with that pleasure. But guess what? All they wanted was mango juice, or what's the other one I give them? Passion fruit juice. And I do concoctions and I mix up. So they love my drinks, but that's what they want, right? So what I do, I try and change their perspective. So with the YouTube thing, there's a channel that they watch of this person playing some computer games, right? And so I've been trying to get them off, but in a way that involves their will. Because if I just pull it away, I know what's going to happen. There's going to be resistance, there's going to be rebellion, there's going to be crying. And even though they can't do it, their state of mind is what I'm worried about. What are you thinking? Do you understand what I've done? No, you don't. All you see is I've taken away this pleasure from you. So I sat them down and I said, you know, we started a channel. They said, yes. I said, do you know how much that person earns? They're like, no, the person that they're watching. I Googled it. They all can read. I let one of them read it out loud. They could not believe it. The person's worth £10 million a year, £10 million. And all she does is play computer games all day. And then they were like, wow. And I said, so while you're watching them, you are wasting your life watching them when you have the talent, the ability to start your own thing, produce your own content. Guess what? The very same moment they all said, Daddy, let's do our own channel then. Come on, let's come with our ideas. And now they had the energy. And the next couple of days, they said, Daddy, come on, we want to do it. We want to do it. And that's what I was looking for. So changing the perspective and the focus and help them to now not see that they were losing something, but in actual fact, they were gaining something greater because they couldn't see what they were losing. I could see, I've lived life. You're wasting time. Well, what's wasting time going to do? Going to make you not get good grades and blah, blah. There's all these consequences we know. They don't know. They can't see it. So that's an example of what I would encourage parents, and for young people being told by their parents, ask your parents why. Challenge your parents in a respectful way, but why? Why don't you want me to do this? What is it? Explain to me. And that's a whole different discussion because you have to have a good relationship to even have that confidence to say that and blah, 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 all those nuances. But if there's any young people watching, that's what I would encourage. Daddy, why are you so strict in this area? What is it? And then you find the parent now going deep with the child to say, look, if you understood where I've come from, poverty and blah, blah, then the child can understand, oh, I get you now. I get it. And spiritually, it's the same. God gives us much detail, a lot of detail as to why he says certain things, and it's for our benefit. So that's how I would answer. Your second question, please, Ravon, if you can repeat that, please.
Okay, my second question, I feel like you've answered it a bit in the first part, okay? But okay, I'll read it out anyway. Again, it says, some young people will argue that restrictions that they face from their parents as promulgated by religion, bordering on being autocratic, are a violation of their human rights.
If it's a violation of your human right and you're old enough, move out. If it's that deep, and let's not be ignorant that there are certain parents in this world which are abusive and it's just repressive, and it might be healthier for you to move out. So instead of fighting, move out. And
can it be used in the name of religion as well?
Oh yeah, most definitely. Oh yes, this happens. For example, from our Christian perspective, we've had a young lady in her she's 19, 20. She's older to make her own decisions. No, she's older than that, in her early 20s. She wants to become a Christian and follow Jesus. And she hasn't been deceived. She's learned herself. She made her own decisions to come and do the teaching with other young people, to go through studies and what have you. And she felt, you know what? This makes sense. I think this is going to be good for my life. Parents don't want it to happen. And they want to force her not to have that baptism. Now, in that situation, she's making her own decision. And so there's an example where if a child, well, if they're teenager or late teens, if they feel that way, I give an example. I would say, move out. If you want to do something, move out. Now you might think, no, we don't want him to move out. Yeah, but if a child does not want to listen, unfortunately, there are situations where the only way they're going to learn is the hard way. I'll give you a funny story where I hope you find it funny. My youngest daughter, she was, I think, 4 or 5. And she said one day in very emotional, impassioned way, I hate you. And I heard it. I was up here and I heard it and I was like, what? And my immediate instinct was like to go downstairs and be like, what did you say? And this thought came to my mind, no. So I went downstairs and I said, oh, really? She doesn't know what she's saying, like the implication of what she's saying. So I said, do you want to know what the implications are of that? She's looking at me like she knows she's going to be in trouble. She's looking at me like, and she's ready to cry. I said, no. So do you hate mommy? I said, okay, then. Do you know what that looks like? Let me show you what that looks like. So I went upstairs and she had this tiny little backpack with some teddy ears on the front. You know those kiddie backpacks? I started packing it with clothes. And she's looking at me like, what is going on? Started packing it with clothes and I put her coat on and I went, there you go. And I says, now leave. I said, you don't want to be here. That's what those words mean. You don't want to be with us. You don't want to be with mommy. Is that what you really want? No, daddy, I don't want that. No, daddy, it's me. So never say that again. Because that, and I always try and teach my children what's the end result of what they're saying. Not just in, obviously I'm a Christian with the spiritual, but in this life, because I believe the principles in the word, as I'm listening to our speakers, you can see they're very practical. Dr. Sparks is quoting things, is very like quoting certain scriptures, is talking about what hurts this machinery that I'm in. Do you see? So same way I try and do that. And obviously, and guess what? She's never said it again. Never said it again. Now, obviously, for people out there, don't think I was ever going to kick up my daughter out at 5 years old. No, I was just frightening her to see the consequences. And yeah, so hopefully that answers, that would be my answer to the question.
Yeah. So you talked about, like your pleasure at wanting to become a Christian and what you thought that would bring, like for you. Mm-hmm. So some people say that with religion, we've heard that only those who walk with Jesus experience, pure joy. Mm-hmm. What is true happiness, Michael? What does that mean? And what is true happiness?
Good question. So let me say this because I forgot to say this. Let me not use the word sin. Let me use another word. Things that are not so healthy and good for us bring us the most emotional. Let's put that word. Let's qualify what pleasure I'm referring to. The emotional pleasure. Of course it does. If it didn't, we wouldn't do it. The porn industry wouldn't be 90 billion, whatever it is, a year if it did not bring some type of pleasure. Let's not pretend. And for some Christians, this is a problem, to acknowledge that, yes, sex before marriage feels good. Drinking alcohol feels good. Going to a club and dancing to music, it is, if you've never done it, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't even know what you're talking about. I've done it. It is the most, the music, oh man, it makes you feel so good. But it's only for a moment. So we need to qualify what pleasure we're talking about. It's only for a moment. And equally, God, let me say this, God invented music. Or let's say this, music wasn't invented by man. Let's say this, sex wasn't invented by man. So all of these things have their rightful place. And I'm going to say this again, the enemy, I believe there's an enemy out there. And even if you don't believe in the devil, you know that there's drinks that can help your body. Then there's drinks that don't help your mind. Your body may feel good. It's an escapism. You get drunk, but the next morning, what happens? What do you call it? It's a hangover. How is that? How is that what you really, nobody wants that, nobody. I've questioned people who smoke. I've tested this out. I've stopped someone on the street and I've said, let me ask you something. If today you could give up smoking, would you? They said, if it was possible today, I'll give up right now. So that begs the question, and for those of you who used to smoke, you resonate with this, why do you do it? Because it was a coping mechanism. I used to work in retail and I had only one break, but my colleagues who smoked, you know how many breaks they have? Even the manager, he has his little breaks because they're allowed to go and smoke, even though it's not written down in the contract, because it's their coping mechanism to deal with stress. They're not smoking because this thing gives them, oh, this is so great. It's the after thing, what they're trying to deal with. So when it comes to pleasure and let's say the truest joy, imagine a joy that has no negative consequences. Imagine, and this is deeper than a feeling. This is more of a contentment, a knowing. For example, my father, let me be personal with everyone online. My father has had many strokes. Am I experiencing joy, feelings? I'm talking about feelings in that moment? No. But guess what? There's still a joy because there is an acknowledgement and a knowing, not a belief. It's stronger than just a belief. It is an assurance that God, no matter what will happen, God will take care of me. So even in the worst situation, if my father is to pass, thank God he's still around. He is to pass. I have an assurance that God will take me through the storm. That's not a feeling. That's a knowing. That's a comfort. That's one of the nights we talked about hope. That's where this hope is not a fleeting feeling. It's something that's grasping something real and tangible and keeping the human psyche sane, because these situations come in your life and they want to bring you down. And it's like they want to, I'm sorry if I'm getting passionate, but this is how I am. It's almost like they get you by the throat like this and say, yeah, life gets you by the throat and says, yeah, who are you? Who do you think you are? And this hope that Jesus gives, oh, everything's going to be hunky-dory. My parents divorced when I was a young child. That was traumatic. Like I said, my father's experienced strokes. That was traumatic. That was difficult. But at the same time, in the tears, in the heartache, there was an acknowledgement, someone bigger than me, stronger than me, and who loves me, loves all of us, is going to help me go through it. That's the joy that what the Christian believer has when he exercises that faith in his living Savior. That's why it's more powerful, more deeper than just the earthly joys, whatever, innocent and not innocent pleasures that we sometimes succumb to.
So as a Christian, what would you say to people who don't want to get baptized for fear that they will lose everything? Their freedom, they'll lose everything. What would you say?
You've been taught wrong. Quite frankly, you have been taught wrong. This is not what God has for your future. God, for example, like music, you've got two sides. You've got music that's not healthy, but you get music that's uplifting and empowering. Let me give a simple example again. If you want to be an athlete, right? Or you want to be a businessman or whatever innocent dream you have, and you want a certain type of music, what music are you going to play? Are you going to play the music from, I don't know what, I don't want to give some examples of movies that I've watched way back in the day, but some horror movie music, right? We know what that sounds like, right? You're going to put that music in the radio, you're going to do that. You're going to put something that's in harmony with your desire, right? So what do you, like this thing of happiness, joy. So for example, let's say you're in a relationship. You don't think God is concerned about making your relationship better? When you give your life to him, God is concerned about every intimate detail. Like we've heard from night to night, the health of the body is the most challenging thing for us because it's real and it's tangible. So guess what? If you give your life to God, God is going to help you along the pathway. God is going to teach you step by step. So when you fail, he picks you back up and he educates you with his word, with good science, with good counsel, with friends. You may not have family right now. Guess what? God's going to provide you with a new family. All of those actual things the human heart desires. The human heart doesn't desire a drink and smoke. It desires what drink and smoke was given. Does that make sense? It doesn't desire broken relationships. So I'm sleeping around and things are not working. It didn't desire that. It desired the thing the thing that the thing was given, if that makes sense, right? So I would say, number one, that person needs to be retaught that what is the future before you is not one that God is going to, let me put it this way. God does not remove anything that is good for us. He doesn't remove anything that's good for us. He only removes those things which are taking away our peace, taking away our joy, guilt and shame, all of those negative things he wants to remove and clean up. Let me use this analogy, restoration. My wife likes watching those programs where to restore houses, right? When you look at the house and you have a couple looking at something, it's all dilapidated, they look and they go, nah, I don't want to buy this. And then you get a developer. He looks at the house and he's like, wow. He sees the potential of what it can become when he takes a hold of that project. That's how God sees us. He sees the potential that if you work with him and you align to work in your life, that house is going to look like $1 million at the end. And God, the developer only takes out the rusty pipes because they're broken, takes out the old bathroom, but he replaces with a new bathroom. He replaces with new pipes. So at the end, everything looks good.
Okay, so I'm just going to go into the chat and just see if we've got any questions.
Cool.
Cool, yeah. Let me see, I'm not seeing any questions at the moment.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Let's take that as a good thing. Maybe
let's say it is a good thing. Yeah. Okay, Michael. So if we just go back to the philosophical question, right? And we just look at the final part of the question, just quickly, because we only have 5 minutes remaining.
Cool.
Is it not natural to incline towards pleasure?
Yes, very, very natural. And that's the challenge. Let me give you a simple illustration. Hunger. If I was to say, is hunger wrong, or the feeling to eat wrong? Everyone would say no. But someone who is smart would say it depends. Because the feeling is neither right or wrong. It's to regulate and to let you know that your body needs food. But guess what? When I stay up way late and then I have that feeling at 3 a.m, what's going to now tell me and determine what decision I make? I need a standard I need to follow. So I'm given a principle here. I need a standard I need to follow. Because if I follow just my feelings in life, everybody can admit that's problematic. If I follow just the feeling, like children, that's what they are. They're emotional creatures at a certain age. They're not thinking. They're just pure emotion. I want this, I want that. Like when I gave the example about drinking juice, all they want to do was drink juice, pure emotion. But the knowledge comes from wisdom. Wisdom comes from experience, has to be given. And I believe there's not, the word of God gives that. And as we're learning good science as well, gives that knowledge so that we can make sound decisions. So when our feelings, our inclined to certain feelings to say, oh, I think that's going to, yeah, man, but I feel good when I eat this. I feel good when I say that or when I do or whatnot. There is knowledge out there that exists to say, look, it's confirming your experience. This is not helping you though, is it? And that's the thing. When we answer with ourselves, we can see certain things are not helping. So we have to seek now new knowledge to make better choices.
So what you've just said there, is there good pleasure and bad pleasure?
I would say there's neither good nor bad. I would say pleasure is pleasure and emotion is an emotion. So like anger, we'll naturally say anger is wrong. No. There's times for angry at certain things I need to be angry for. When I see abuse of the police of black people in certain situations, I am angry. That's a natural response. Like jealousy, we think naturally would say jealousy, oh, that's negative. But for those of us in relationships or married, all of a sudden jealousy is like, oh, but that's natural for me to be jealous. So emotions, I don't equate them as morally good or morally wrong. It's just an emotion. What makes it right or wrong is the knowledge you're following of where to carry that emotion. When do I fulfill it? How do I fulfill it? So what I'm suggesting is that there's a principle outside of us, an object, a law that exists outside of us that neither takes time, space, nor culture changes, has always been there. That's what we need to acknowledge. Otherwise, we're just a law unto ourselves. And the law unto ourselves means, well, what's good for me may not be good for you. And if it's good for you, then do what you want, as long as you don't hurt nobody. That's what my friends used to say at school. But in reality, if I'm not living the life I'm supposed to, even though it doesn't look like I'm hurting anybody, I am hurting somebody by the fact that I'm not in the right place or in the right state of mind to be there for somebody because I'm living a selfish life type of thing. So hopefully that makes sense.
Okay, so Michael, so just to, my last question is, why has religion got a control over every aspect of my life? Why has religion? I'll read it. Why religion has to control every aspect of my life? So I'm trying to read the question as it is.
Yeah. So so it's not every aspect. I don't believe every aspect. When it comes from the Christian perspective, the biblical perspective, it's not every aspect. When it says control, that word is seen in a very negative way. The thing about when you actually look at God from the word properly, the Bible says God is love. So let's use that. Yes, just use that as our premise. When I got married, my wife did not go, woof, and she just had a long list of do's and don'ts. She didn't do that. There are certain expectations, yes, but there are so many other nuances and details she never said was in the contract. But when love is in the mix, those things are no problem for me. No problem. It's not an issue. When love is not in the mix, no matter what she asks for, it could be the most innocent thing. Get me a drink. Guess what? It's going to get on my nerves. I don't want to get a drink right now because there's no love. You've annoyed me today. There's no love. So when love is not in the equation, this thing about the Christian perspective, it is the only book, the Bible, in the world that presents a God who loves people that don't love him back. And so the perspective that the Bible brings is that, no, before you even do anything, I love you. So anyone wanting to enter a relationship is from that perspective, not from a do's and don'ts. Yes, God has a standard called the 10 Commandments. Yes, but even that, the Bible is clear. Jesus says, my law is based upon love for me and love for my fellow man. So when you look at that, you think, that's not controlling. That's not prohibitive. That's God is telling me to not slap you in the face when you get on my nerves. God is telling me not to just not do things. God is telling me to be proactive. Last quick point. Jesus Christ, when you think about him, even the atheist acknowledges Jesus as a person was a good man. But you don't see Jesus going around trying to not be, trying to not do, trying to not sin, as it were, trying to avoid certain places, trying to stop listening to certain music. You don't ever see Jesus like that. And this is anybody, the Muslim, the Hindu, the Buddhist, the atheist, the agnostic, and the Christian. You think of Christ as someone who, hey, he was proactively helping people. He was loving, healing diseases, delivering people from demon possession, healing people, talking about their physical health. And you think, so the religion that God is promoting is one of proactive love, one of helping and being there for people in whatever way we can. And so that doesn't seem like prohibition now. And now goes to my first point. Unfortunately, Christians, we unfortunately have been guilty of talking about the wrong so much, prohibition so much. Young people and even visitors from outside get the perspective of, so what can I do then? What can I do? Let me give you one more quick, I know we've gone over time, one more quick example. My brother told my cousin many, many years ago to stop eating certain foods. He did. My brother came back a week later. He said, Jonathan, man, I've been struggling. My brother's name is Jonathan. He said, why? What happened? Why? He goes, I don't know what to eat. He was eating white pasta, boiled white pasta. This is the real story. And this will make the point as I finish, for the whole week, because he did not know what to eat. Because all my brother spent his time, don't eat this, don't eat that, don't eat this. And he cut everything out to the detriment. That wasn't the health. That wasn't health news, good news. That was actually health deform, right? So we can do that, and we have, and I say we, because I'm part of the Christian faith, we have done that spiritually. We've condemned for so long that nobody's seen, our young, beautiful children are not seeing the beauty and the joys they can get because we haven't emphasized all the wonderful things we can participate in, all the glorious things we can do in life that will give us true satisfaction and purpose in this life.
Thank you very much, Michael.
Sorry for
Thank
going
you.
over time a little bit. Sorry.
That's fine. Thank you. I'll now hand over back to Lesmond or to Leroy for the final thought. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Ramona and Michael. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us again this evening. And would you believe it? We're halfway through the series. So stick with us, and I'm sure the next 5 programs will be just as informative. So what's happening next Monday? As the doctor said previously, the physical health seminar will look at arthritis. The mental health section will look at mental health principles. And the spiritual section, there's a question there that is, what evidence is there to believe in creation? So some things there for us to think about. As usual, we're asking that you leave your feedback on the website. That's totaltransformationseminar.uk. So all I have to say now is have a great weekend and see you on Monday evening at 7 for another Total Transformation Seminar. So good night and keep safe.
Good night. Thank you.